Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode of Teen Talk Live. I'm so excited to be here with you. I am Ann Dillard, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist practicing in Minnesota and also in the state of Georgia. Tonight we have a really interesting topic for you, so I just want you to come on in and join the conversation because I'm going to be talking about suicide and suicide prevention. This is something that a lot of people shy away from. There's so much stigma attached to this, but I want to have this engaging conversation with you tonight. Now, this month's production of Teen Talk Live is brought to you by Joseph Dillard, financial coach at Ex-Banker Blog, and he is sponsoring Teen Talk Live for the whole month of September because September is National Insurance Awareness Month. And so Joseph, he has over 30 years of experience in the financial industry. And he says, I don't really sell products. I provide a solution to help individuals and to help families to save money, decrease their debt, protect their income, and also become financially free. And you can contact Joseph at www.xbankerblog or on Facebook at xbankerblog. And so he is sponsoring this month's episodes of Teen Talk Live. So I'm glad you're here. Again, share this video out. Come on in, join us in this conversation, and let's just talk about suicide prevention. You know, what is that about? What does it look like? So as you come into this broadcast, I want you to like it. I want you to share it. I see my friends from Senegal. They're joining the broadcast. Say bonjour or bon nuit. Or, yeah, because it's nighttime there now. And I'm not going to spend a long time with you, but I want to talk about mental health, mental illness, and what is it? Hey, Pastor Sylvia, I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. We are talking about, let's talk about suicide and suicide prevention. Again, September is National Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month, and I want to make sure that we are having these conversations about suicide prevention and awareness in our community, because contrary to popular belief, this is a very common situation. This is very common in our community. It's happening every day, and it's happening more and more with our younger population, right? So if you're joining the broadcast, share it out. If you're on a replay, just hashtag replay so that I know that you are here with me on the broadcast. All right. Again, I'm Ann Dillard, and I'm glad to be here with you. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the states of Georgia and in Minnesota. So glad you're here. So let's talk about suicide prevention. And if you're here with me, tell me, what is your experience, or what has been your experience with suicide or suicide prevention? I want to hear from you. Okay. So when we think about suicide, again, it's something that we don't necessarily like to talk about. And I have my notes here because I want to make sure I give you some really good information tonight. And before we start talking about suicide, we have to step back and we have to talk about mental health, and we have to talk about mental illness, right? So what is mental health? Because mental health is different from mental illness. And a lot of times we don't want to talk about mental health because we think it's mental illness, right? Mental health is just like talking about physical health, emotional health. It's like talking about something that affects us all. So mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and our social well-being, right? It affects how we think, it affects how we feel, and it affects how we act. It also helps to determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and the choices that we make in life. Okay, so when we're talking about mental health, we're talking about all the state of being in, to be able to respond to the stressors in life and how we live our life, right? Mental health is important at every age and every stage of life. It's important for children, it's important for teens, it's important for adults. Everybody needs to pay close attention to their mental health, right? So when we look at mental illness, it's more of it's a condition that affects the person's thinking. It affects your mood. It affects your feelings, right? It affects your ability to relate to others and function daily. So a lot of times people have challenges with mental illness, and this is something that can be helped, right? It's something that you can get either therapy or medical help for, medicine. Mental illness is not something to really shy away and be afraid of, right? When it begins to affect your functioning, know that you can get help. You can get help before it starts affecting your functioning. Many people in America and all over the world are living with mental illness. So let me just pause and welcome our guests. Hey, Ms. Corey. Sister Sandy, thanks for being here. Hey, Kelvin. Hey, Zachary. I'm glad you all are here. We're talking about suicide and suicide prevention tonight. So just let me know that you're still here. Shout out. Hey, Darla. I'm glad you're here too. And so each person has a different capacity for dealing with mental illness, right? So you might have the same diagnosis as somebody else, but it doesn't mean that your capacity for navigating that and dealing with that is the same, because maybe of your experiences, it might be the support system that you have in your life. So we have different capacity for dealing with mental illness. And mental illness is really not a bad word, and it's not a bad topic for us to be talking about. And I would love to see more people taking account of their mental illness or their mental health state and looking at, do you need help for mental illnesses, right? So what causes mental illness? Mental illness is caused by, your biology makeup, biological factors. It's caused by genes. It's caused by brain chemistry. It's really nothing to be ashamed of. Okay, it's caused by life experiences, too much stressors in your life, abuse, trauma. Those are things that contribute to mental illness, right? And it could also be a family history of mental illness and mental health problems. And again, I just want to say that if you suspect that there's something going on and you have a low capacity to deal with stressors in your life, you feel like you're sad all the time, or you're always worried, or you feel really anxious about stuff, go get some help, because you can live a fully successful life, right? Yes. Hey, Calvin. You know what? Just doing it and educating our community, because it's so important that we talk about mental health and mental illness in our community. Hey, Gina. Hey, Lynn. I'm so glad you have joined us tonight. So, okay, so let me continue to talk about this. Mental illness is nothing to be ashamed of, right? It's a medical problem, just like heart disease, just like diabetes, right? It's just like, high blood pressure or other things that's going on physically. Hey, Kathy, I'm glad you're here. Hey, Cassandra. So it's nothing to be ashamed of. Mental health is the foundation for thinking, communicating, resilience, self-esteem. Mental health is the key to relationship, personal and emotional well-being, and contributing to our community and contributing to our society. Because if you are not in proper mental health, it's hard for you. It could impair your ability to contribute in these ways, right? So I'm just taking the time to talk about mental health versus mental illness. Mental illness, it does not discriminate. We can't say that Black folks don't have mental illness, or we can't say that you have to be a certain age to have mental illness. Mental illness is not a risk factor of person. Hey, Mia, I'm glad you're here, rock star. It doesn't discriminate against gender. It doesn't discriminate against socioeconomic status. It doesn't matter how much money you make, right? Mental illness, you can still be impacted by mental illness. And it takes all different forms. There are different severities of mental illnesses that we see. And so it's important, again, that if you're struggling in your everyday life, that you get some support. You don't have to go through this alone, right? So mental illness is very, very common, right? And I want some of my colleagues who are joining me to chime in, because we're leading up to talking about suicide prevention. But I want people to get some foundational information about mental health versus mental illness, right? So it's important to know that mental illness is very common, right? 1 in 5 adults have a mental illness, and 1 in 4 children. Okay, so it's very common, and there are a lot of people who are operating and not operating at full capacity because they don't have their mental illness in check. And there is help, right? Depression is the most common form of mental illness. Depression, okay? So half of all mental illnesses begin at age 14, right? So that's the population that I serve, predominantly teenagers. But it's important to know that in serving teenagers, I have to serve the entire family, right? Because the teenager is still connected. Yes, Gina, 1 in 5 adults and 1 in 4 children. And we can't continue to overlook this, right? So again, depression is the most common. And a lot of times we walk around and we say, I'm depressed, I'm depressed, I'm depressed. But there is like a clinical assessment to go through to determine depression. Are you just sad? Are you just worried? Or are you clinically depressed, right? That's a word that we throw out commonly. Mental disorders are important, are important. There are important risk factors that we should look at. There's stigma and discrimination against people and family that prevents them from seeking services, right? And we can't continue to do that because people are dying and people are becoming more isolated if they're not feeling like they could go get help and get support for their mental health issues and challenges. There's social stigmas, there's prejudice, there's people with mental health challenges are dangerous. Those are some of the stigmas that's attached to it. And if you are in the church, it's like people with mental health, you're not praying enough, you're not seeking God enough, which is definitely not true, right? And we have to stop doing that and saying that to people. There's the social stigma. Hey, Ann, thanks for joining us. How we perceive ourselves, how it affects our feelings. And there's a lot of shame that goes along with mental health issues. A lot of shame. Okay. And this leads people to poor outcomes for services. And it leads people to not seek in services. Hey, cousin, thanks for joining all the way from Canada. Novlet is here. So if they go in already they go into treatment already feeling like there's no hope for me and things like that, it makes it really hard. So I think as we become more educated about mental health challenges, we have to become more accepting. Hey, Queen Cassandra, thank you. Thank you for doing it with me, girl. So, and there's stigma towards teenagers, right? Again, I keep talking about teenagers because that's the population that I serve. And there's family stigma, and we love to call people crazy. You all stop it. It's not cute, and it is not okay to keep calling people crazy, right? Because they might laugh in your face, and then when they are alone, then they have to think about those words. Words are really damaging. For their peers, it's really isolating, and when peers pick on them because they're a little different and they respond differently to things, it's really, really hard. Teachers, it's hard for teachers to recognize a lot of times when students have mental health issues because it's not something that's necessarily physically manifested, right? And so you don't necessarily know that you're dealing with a mental health issue. And that's challenging. And again, it's challenging in the faith community because there's a lot of stigma around if you're saved enough, if you're praying enough, if you're seeking God enough, you wouldn't have mental health issues. So those are things that we need to check ourselves on. And if you are one of the people who is helping to perpetuate these stereotypes, stop it. It's not right. People are dying and people are killing themselves, right? Because of these stigmas. So what are some of the consequences of untreated mental illness? That is huge because we have a large population of untreated people with untreated mental illness, and they continue to not come forward. Hey, Samara, I'm so glad you're here. So consequences, suicide is one of the big consequences, right? It's the third leading cause of death in youth between the ages of 15 and 24. Can you imagine? Suicide. We have kids as young as 7 and 8 who are taking their own lives because they feel hopeless, right? So it's important that we continue to look at this. Over 90% of children and adolescents who commit suicide have a mental health disorder. Over 90%. It's not just they just didn't want to live. It's not that, they were just sad. They legitimately have a mental health illness or a mental illness. So what are other things that you see with the consequences of untreated mental illness? School failure, right? 50% of students ages 14 and older who are living with a mental illness drop out of high school. So 50%, think about that, 50% of our kids who are 14 and older who are living with a mental illness, they drop out of high school. Why is that happening? We have to ask ourselves that, right? In the juvenile and criminal involvement, listen to this, 65% of boys and 75% of girls in the juvenile detention have at least one mental illness. So kids as young as 8 years old in the juvenile system, they're being detained, right, because of their actions due to mental health issues and mental illness. So we have to really, really wake up and start getting our children some help. This is concerning. These statistics are concerning. And one of the most concerning statistics to me is that the rise of suicide amongst Black males, young Black males. That is very, very concerning that our young Black males have such a high increase in suicide, right? Yes, this is evidence-based, and this is so important that we become aware about this, right? And we can't just wait till September, which is National Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month, to talk about this. We have to talk about it with our kids. We have to talk about it in our churches. We have to talk about it in our Sunday schools. This has to become a common conversation across the board, right? So facts, suicide, again, is the third leading cause of death, ages 14 to 24. At least, listen to this, at least 25 attempts are made for every completed teen suicide. Think about that. Every time you hear that a teen committed suicide, at least 25 attempts have been made. We got to do better, right? They've tried at least 25 times before they were successful in doing that. Hey, Dee, thanks for being here. Hey, Katie, thanks for joining us. Nearly 60% of all suicides in the United States are committed by guns, followed by drug overdose, right? Guns and drug overdose, 60%. This is alarming to me too. Girls experience suicide ideation and attempt suicide about twice as often as boys, right? But boys, they are, boys complete the suicide more often. So girls have more attempts twice as often as boys, but boys complete the suicide more often. Female suicide by overdosing is very popular, right? Suicide by overdosing in female. In males, it's more suicide by firearms, hanging, or jumping from heights, right? Those are facts. And these are facts by the Journal of American Academy of Children and Adolescent Psychiatry. Okay, so this is evidence-based facts. And I know that the topic is a little heavy tonight for Teen Talk Live, but we have to talk about this, right? So if you're joining me, I want you to share this video out, share it out, comment, say hi, let me know that you're here with me. We're talking about suicide prevention and suicide awareness, because September is Suicide Awareness Month, right? So let's look at suicide in the African American community. The suicide rate of Black children in between the ages of 5, yes, I said 5, and 11 has doubled between 1993 and 2013, while the rate amongst white children have declined. 5 years old. Black children between the ages of 5 and 11, okay? Suicide by hanging nearly tripled amongst Black boys. This is real, you all. This is research-based, and this information is from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. So I didn't make this up, right? Suicide has become the third leading cause of death amongst Black males between the ages of 15 and 24. 33% of rape victims think about suicide and are 13 times more likely to commit suicide. African American women are more likely than African American men to attempt suicide. African American LGBTQ youth also have a high suicide rate. So we have to pay attention to all of our youth, regardless of their sexuality. It's so important. Okay, so what questions do you all have as you join me And we're talking about this heavy topic. It's a heavy topic on Labor Day, but I want to make sure that you have the information, right? So what questions do you have for me? Drop them in the comment section and I will do my very best to answer them, right? And if you're just joining me, let me know that you're here. Say hello, share this video out, and I'd love to talk with you more. Okay, so what are some of the risk factors for suicide and suicide behaviors? Prior suicide attempts. Remember, I talked about 25 attempts before a completed suicide. Some psychological disorders like depression, bipolar disorder, alcohol, prescription drugs, trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder. Yes, Mia, I'm going to list some signs to look for. That's a really important point. So these are some of the things that predispose people to suicide, right? Family history of suicide, poor support network, history of bullying, guilt, shame, humiliation. Those are things that are precursors, right? Precursors. Hopelessness, impulsive and aggressive tendencies, and easy access to lethal methods like like guns and things like that. Easy access. Those are risk factors. Exposure to the suicide of a family member or friend or significant other. So if you or your teen has been exposed to a family member or someone close who died from suicide, pay close attention because that's a very important risk factor. History of physical or sexual abuse, that's a high risk factor, right? Low self-esteem, pay attention because we're getting signs. People are telling us they're crying out for help, right? Thanks for joining, Sister Kimball. Life stressors, especially interpersonal losses, legal or disciplinary problems, meaning if they lost a job or they lost a relationship or they're having legal issues and things like that, people don't necessarily have the capacity to deal with an enormous amount of stress. Remember, we talked about that earlier when we talked about your mental health and your capacity to manage stress, right? Lack of involvement in school, and you notice that the schoolwork is drifting and lack of motivation. Physical illness, sometimes people just get really tired of being sick. Age, culture, lack of connectedness, people feeling lonely. I see a lot of girls who are isolated, feeling lonely, feeling like they don't belong. And that's, you know, when I get those clients, one of the first questions I ask them is, have you thought about committing suicide? And how often? And do you have a plan? Because it's connectedness is so important, right? And here's a big one that as parents, we have to look at: exposure to sensational media reports of suicide. We have to look at what our teens are seeing because their brains aren't fully developed and capable of understanding and navigating some of these things that they're seeing on social media, right? So what are some of the specific signs that we'll see in school? Especially, I want to talk about this because school is getting ready to start. And this might help a teacher, it might help somebody who works in the educational system, but any sudden or dramatic change should be taken seriously, such as an overall decline in grades. Okay, so last year you were an A student and now you're pulling all D's, right? Decrease in effort. I don't want to. Misconduct in class, lack of motivation. Those are really signs of distress that should really be looked at. Okay, unexplained or repeated absence or truancy. That's something that you pay attention to. And I'm going to say this, The CDC shows that 76% of teens who kill themselves showed a decline in school performance in the prior year. Okay, so pay attention. And if you are a school staff, don't feel like you have to deal with this yourself. Pass it on to higher authorities, somebody who's trained, a mental health professional, right? Because that is important, okay? And pay attention to the signs that you're seeing. So I'm going to move ahead and talk about warning signs, right? Because Nia was saying earlier, let's talk about some of the warning signs. Clear, blatant warning signs are things like, and warning signs, they're beyond risk factor, right? Risk factor just put you in the arena, said that it's likely that this will happen. And so warning signs is like, it's highly likely that this could happen. So talking, reading, or writing about suicide or death, that's a clear warning sign. Talking about feeling worthless or helpless, that's another clear warning sign. Saying I'm going to kill myself, or I wish I was dead, or I shouldn't have been born. Okay, take those things seriously. And if I have this document of things to say and things not to say if your child say I'm going to kill myself. So if you drop your email in the comment section, I'll make sure you get that document. And it's a document that says things to say and things not to say if your child said I'm going to kill myself. Okay. Again, if you're just joining me, this broadcast and this month's Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month has been sponsored by Joseph Dillard, financial consultant. He has been in the industry for the financial services for over 30 years. And he says, I don't just sell products, I provide solutions to help individuals and families to save money, decrease debt, protect their income, and become financially free. And he has worked with me to set up a retirement fund for my company. And I'm so excited to be partnering with him. And he's sponsoring Teen Talk Live. And if you're interested in being a sponsor for Teen Talk Live, just inbox me and I'll let you know how you can do that, okay? So let's get back to warning signs, right? Saying I'm gonna kill myself, I shouldn't have been born, I hate myself, those are key signs. Visiting or calling people to say goodbye, take it seriously. Giving away things or returning borrowed items, right? So you're giving away prized possessions, your collections. Hey, Jazz Daz, thanks for joining. You're giving these things away. Those are key points. Self-destructive or reckless behaviors. Don't just take it lightly. Sometimes we say, oh, boys will be boys. They're teenagers. They love risk. Take it seriously, okay? And dig deeper. Don't just brush it off. Significant changes in behavior. That's really important. Again, I talked about the signs that you see at school, the lack of motivation, the increase, decline in grades. That's really important. Running away. Running away is another key factor, and we should really look at that. And one of this note I'm going to read, it says, when a child has more than one of these factors, the risk of suicide increases. Furthermore, it has been found that teens who run away are 3 times more likely to have suicidal ideation or suicidal behaviors. So teens who run away are 3 times more likely to have suicidal ideation. We have to pay attention. We have to pay attention. Yes, Candace, change in behavior. Yes, don't, and it doesn't have to be all bad, negative change in behavior. If all of a sudden your child, just made that full roundabout change, and it's like, oh my gosh, what happened? Sometimes we might say, oh my goodness, prayer changes things. Yes, it does, but also investigate and see what else is going on, right? Suicidal warning signs, helplessness again. Statements like, there's no point in going on. I can't take it anymore. I have nothing to live for. I can't stop the pain. I can't live without blank, 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 right? My life keeps getting worse and worse. I might as well kill myself. Those are really key points. Hopelessness is a component of depression and a risk factor for suicide. All right. Remember, I said connection, hopelessness. People experience hopelessness when they believe there's no chance of improvement in the future. They may have reasons why their problem cannot get better in the future, or that life will continue to be unbearably painful or even worsen. Children and teens may especially have poor coping or problem solving skills, which adds to their feelings of hopelessness, right? So it's important to pay attention to those hopelessness conversations and talk, right? And check in on their social media. What are they talking about? Check their rooms. You know, don't be surprised and be one of the parents who are like, oh, I didn't know that was going on in my child's room or in my house. You know, be nosy because it might save their life. So what questions do you have for me? Hey, Mia, thank you again. What questions do you have for me? Because as we talk about suicide prevention, it's important that we, okay, one, look at the warning sign. Here's some protection against suicide, right? Getting help from a mental health or physical, getting help for mental health, physical, and substance abuse disorders. It's important. Hey, Star Sister, thanks for joining. It's important to get help, especially when there's signs of depression, right? Remember, depression is not just a word that you just throw around. That's an important diagnosis that contributes to other mental health illnesses. So please pay attention to that and not take it lightly. An established relationship with a doctor, a clergy, a teacher, a counselor, or other professional can help. Connectedness to the community, connectedness to friends, learning skills in problem solving and nonviolent conflict resolution. That is so important because a lot of times people and teens follow through with suicide because they don't have the proper coping skills, right? So learning those problem solving and coping skills, conflict resolution skills is so important, so critical. Cultural religious beliefs that discourages suicide is important. And we also have to pay attention to that. And we have to pay attention to, again, how much pressure we apply. I agree that some pressure is good, but there is a level of pressure that will push people over the brink, right? So be careful and pay attention to the amount of pressure that you apply, especially to teenagers, right? Protection against suicide more. Recognize the signs and the symptoms, right? Peer education is really important. Make sure your child or children, they're hearing from other peers about suicide and suicide prevention. Training and education of school personnel, that is critical. And making sure that school personnel know that the signs to look for. And if they see those signs, they don't have to take it on themselves. They need to refer it to the professional in that area. Access to mental health resources, that is so key. Acceptance of need for help, right? You're not weak because you need help. Making it normal to ask for help is really, really important. initiating open and candid conversations about mental illness, about mental health, about needing help, about hope, about connection, about recovery, all those things. Having open dialogue about it helps people to come out of isolation and be more connected, right? And take a systemic approach. You don't do this in isolation. You have to look at it from a systemic standpoint. Who in the community can help you, right? Where can you find some resources? Develop mentoring relationships. That's really key. How help in decreasing the stigma around suicide and mental health issues, right? And most importantly, noticing and praising positive changes and listening to the concerns of your teens who might be struggling. So again, it is so important to look for the warning signs. If you have questions for me, drop it in the question on the question section, and I'll be happy to answer it. If you're joining on the replay, make sure you hashtag replay, and please, please, please share this out, because we cannot afford to continue with these statistics, right? Where we have 65% of girls and 75% of boys in the juvenile system have at least one mental health issue, right? Or we have so many of our youth, remember I gave you the statistics from age 5 to 11, who have attempted and have committed suicide, right? Joseph said, how do you begin to talk about suicide in person? It's easy to share a post on social media, but it can be more difficult to bring it up in person. I think that's a really, really good answer. And like I just said, it's important to have open dialogue about it and notice the signs. And if you notice the signs, you can ask and say, you know, is there something going on that we need to talk about? And you can come out and ask, have you thought about committing suicide? And people think that if they come out and they're blunt with it, it'll send somebody to do it. That doesn't send people to do it. At least if you come out and you talk about it and you set that stage where the conversation can be held, then you can find proper resources and you can get the answers that you need. I think a lot of times as parents, we are afraid of the answer that we might get. And so we don't broach the subject. But coming out and asking, or saying, I noticed this, I noticed that, I noticed that you've had a sharp decrease or decline in your grades, or I noticed that you've been spending a lot of time alone. I noticed that you've been really sad. How are you feeling? Have you thought about committing suicide? Or I know that your friend committed suicide over the summer. How are you feeling? Right? So we have to stop being afraid of the answer, and we have to ask those difficult questions and know that if you're not equipped to give provide the resources, there are people equipped to do that, right? Hey, Miss Keisha. Hey, Miss Jackie. Thanks for joining us, right? So we have to stop being afraid, because that could potentially save our child's life or somebody else's child's life, because it's real. Suicide is real, not just in children. I know I've focused on teens because that's the population that I serve predominantly, but this also in adults. I mean, our community has been plagued with deaths over deaths and deaths, and it's not necessarily suicidal deaths, right? But when people are grieving and feel like there's no hope, that's one of the things that they go to get some relief, right? Do you feel within our race we are not as open to address mental health? Yes, Candace, I feel like there's so much stigma around mental health in the African American community. There's so much stigma. And in the African community, there's a lot of stigma attached to it because people with mental health is not bad, right? Neither is mental illness. But people who have mental illness are often seen as weak in our community, as there's something is wrong with them, or they did something and God is getting them back, all that kind of stuff, which is not right. A lot of times, and I shared this earlier in the video, that a lot of mental illness is caused by genetics. It's also caused by trauma. It's caused by abuse. It's caused by the brain functioning, and so we have to pay attention to that and stop blaming people for mental health issues. It's not your fault if you have a mental health issue, right? And you're right, Miss Jackie, adults are suffering, and we have to pay attention to that, right? And again, I spent a lot of time talking about our teenagers, again, because that's the population that I serve. But it's so important that we intervene, that we have these difficult conversations. And if you would like that information from me of what to say and what not to say, if your teenager says, I'm going to kill myself, or it's not just limited to teenagers. If somebody say, I'm going to kill myself, what to say and what not to say, right? Don't say, what you got to kill yourself for? You got everything you want in life. That's not the right time to say that kind of stuff, right? So if you want that list from me, just drop your email in the comment section or inbox me your email and I'll get that over to you. But it's important. Okay, so trauma is like extensive event that happened in your life that usually you have no control over it, and it brings an enormous amount of stress, right? So some people, when their tolerance for trauma is different. All of our tolerance for trauma is different, right? So trauma could be anything from a fire that the family has gone through, or it might be a car accident, right? Or it might be witnessing somebody getting beat up at school. Those are all traumatic events, and depending on the condition of your mental health, you have a different capacity to deal with the different traumas in your life. So I hope that I've answered your question about what is trauma. Okay. So again, pay attention, intervene, so it says in my notes, I want to make sure, hey, Audrey, thanks for joining us. Not everyone who works with teenagers should work with a suicidal teen. Not everyone, right? So know your limitation. Get someone else to help if you are a recent suicide survivor, if you're experiencing suicidal thoughts yourself, if you're experiencing significant stress in your own life, if you have negative personal feelings about this person, or if you don't have mental health training, get professional help, because not everyone is equipped to deal with this. It's important that you know your limitations, right? So if you suspect that someone is experiencing suicidal ideation, again, check in. It's always important to call 911. One of the things that I learned when I was in the school system is that when you call 911, you can ask for a mental health person to come out, right? Especially if you're having a mental health issue crisis, you can ask for a trained mental health person to come out. And I know that in our community, a lot of times we are hesitant to call 911 because of all the things that been happening with the police, and we see people who are getting killed, and they have mental health issues. You can ask, when you call 911, you can ask for a mental health professional or officer who's trained to come out. So again, I have that resource for you, things to say or things not to say, but let me give you a couple of tips. What you can say: I'm glad you told me, I want to help, right? You can say, I'm glad you told me, I'm going to find somebody to help. I'll stay with you until help arrives, right? Those are things that you can say. What not to say: things not to say. Don't say it's just a phase. Don't say you'll snap out of it. Don't say stop being selfish, right? I see sweat just pouring off my face. Don't say you're just trying to get attention. Don't say get over it. Don't say just pray about it, okay? If you're at church and somebody comes to the altar and they ask for prayer for suicidal ideation, please, please, please pray for them and also get medical help, right? Get professional help, because there have been cases where it's come back to the church that, oh, I told somebody at church and they didn't do anything about it, right? So that's just an extra tidbit to my clergy who are watching, okay? So those are some of the tips that I have for you. And again, if you want more information, if you want to get a free 15-minute consultation, make sure you make an appointment with me, www.andillard.com. Or you can put a comment in the comment section on this live. Please share this out. Let's spread the word about this. Or you can inbox me, right? I would love, love, love to talk to you more. And if you want that document on what to say and what not to say, I want you to drop your email, right? So again, this broadcast in the month of September, Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month, which is also Insurance Awareness Month, is sponsored by Joseph Dillard, who's a financial consultant for over 30 years. And I'm gonna share my screen a little bit just to show you who Joseph is. And if you are interested in being a sponsor yourself, please inbox me and I'll let you know how you can sponsor a month of Teen Talk Live. So Joseph said, I don't sell products, I provide financial solutions, right? And he has helped me also with financial solutions for my business. He says, I provide financial solutions to help individuals, financial solutions to help families, to save money, decrease their debts, protect their income, and become financially free. And you can find Joseph on social media at xbankerblog or www.xbankerblog.com. Ms. Candace has a question. One observation though, throughout the years, many of us have issues visiting a therapist and have felt it as an embarrassment, or we have been told God can change it. True, however, he places these people, those people in need. I totally agree, Candace, that yes, there has been a big stigma around visiting therapists. And as a therapist myself, I'm a trained clinician to deal with a lot of issues. And so it's important to pray. I'll never tell somebody not to pray. It's important to pray. It's important to seek God. And God has put people in our stead, just like the medical doctors there. You go for your regular medical checkup. You know, you need to go for your regular mental health checkup also, right? And people are trained in our community to offer mental health services, which is helping with coping skills, helping you to work through different trauma, abuses, different things to help you manage that mental health issue so that you can fully function in society, right? And so it's important that we help to reduce the stigma around mental health care and around mental illness, right? Because again, we talked about the causes, and it's not your fault, right? There's so many things that contribute to one's mental health um, functioning. All right. So again, if you have questions for me, feel free to drop them in the comment section. And we're going to be coming back to you talking about suicide and suicide prevention for the month of September. I'll bring different topics to you as it relates to this. And if you have questions or suggestions of things you want me to address on this topic, feel free to drop me an inbox, drop me information, visit my website, or set up a 15-minute free consultation. It don't cost you anything. Let's talk about it, because the silence is killing us in our community. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're joining on the replay, hit #replay and share this information out. And I look forward to catching you on the next broadcast. Thank you all and have a good night.